Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you my spring reading recommendations. So for spring, in terms of being like a mood reader, I always associate spring with books that kind of talk about change, stuff that are like evolving, or I like kind of like dreary, wet, soggy atmospheres, just to kind of go with the kind of wet spring weather that I usually get where I live. So I have a wide variety of books. They're kind of all over in terms of genre. There's some historical fiction, fantasy, and just kind of a good crime series. So without further ado, let's get started. So starting up, I have one, like this series overall just kind of goes with different seasons, but I think like especially crime series I think are fun to read during the springtime, and I have Still Life by Louise. I have an entire video dedicated to why I love this series so much, but I feel like it is like, I feel like when I first started reading this, I started reading it in the spring and I just like marathon through it throughout like lockdown and like COVID stuff. So I've read all like 18 books so far, but I have really enjoyed them. And what is really nice too is that it kind of takes place in this fictionalized town in Quebec, and I feel like it kind of totally like embodies that like wet spring feel, like especially like with this town and then the mountains in the background. Like I feel like it has that kind of spring, you know, growth like vibes to it, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I feel like this is just an amazing crime series and I think you guys need to check it out. Don't be intimidated by the 18 books. It just means that you can be immersed in this world for a long time. But the general premise of this series, it follows Inspector Gamache, who is head of the homicide department in Quebec, in Montreal. And so a lot of his murders that he investigates somehow involve this small town of Three Pines. And some of the major themes in here are found family, light versus dark, good versus evil. And like I said, it's my favorite crime series of all time. And yeah, I just want you guys to pick it up. You can read this any time of the year, but I feel like just kind of the spring wet soggy atmosphere kind of goes along with crime series. So speaking of books that have kind of that wet soggy vibe to them, I have The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton. This is probably one of my favorite Kate Morton books of all time, and I feel like it truly embodies that like soggy spring feeling that you get where you just look outside, it's dreary, it's wet, all that stuff. I feel like this book totally kind of has that vibe to it if you're looking for something like that. But it follows a girl who was in the early 1900s who is abandoned on this small ship that went from England to Australia, and she was adopted by this family. She spent her whole life thinking her family was her family, but her family eventually tells her that she's adopted, and that destroys her life. So when that kind of child grows old and passes away, her granddaughter finds this mysterious fairy tale book, and she wants to uncover more about her grandmother's kind of history and who she was and why she was left abandoned on a boat. So that takes her to England, and then we kind of get the past storyline where we follow this young woman in the late 1880s, 1890s in London, and obviously there's kind of the merging of the two storylines, and it kind of goes off from there. Not only does this have kind of the dual storyline, historical fiction mystery kind of storyline, which I think is done really well, but I think it really encaptures kind of that Victorian era in like London, or England in particular. We follow London where it's like grimy and dirty, and then we kind of could take off into like the English countryside where it's just wet and cold and dreary. So in addition to kind of having the atmosphere, I think the plot does a really good job at really keeping you invested and understanding how these two like past present storylines are connected, and it's just really immersive. It's just a lot of fun, and Kate Morton is a very awesome author, and I feel like this is a really good book to kind of start to kind of, you know, immerse yourself in her writing. Next up, for kind of a fairy tale-esque type mood, I have Nettle and Bone by Kingfischer. I read this book last fall and I really enjoyed it. It is fairly short too. It is under 300 pages, so it's actually under 250 pages, but it is very kind of atmospheric in terms of kind of like a dark fairy tale, and I feel like that is just really atmospheric, and just the world that this author was able to create within such a short amount of time too was just really fun. But it follows this girl who is a princess who is the youngest out of three sisters, so she's kind of sent to a convent to kind of live her life unbothered by the kind of royal pressures. But when her older sister was betrothed to a prince, she was murdered before her wedding day. So the middle sister was like betrothed to this prince again, and she's pregnant, and the sister is worried about her older sister's safety. So she embarks on a quest and like kind of getting a ragtag team of characters as well, such as kind of a fairy godmother, a dog made of bones, and a mysterious man, and it kind of goes off from there. I feel like this is just a fun like book to read. It's like a kind of like has that fairy tale-esque atmosphere and kind of also like quest vibes as well. And if you're looking for something like short, sweet, atmospheric, I think this is a good book to read during the springtime. Spring too is also a great time to kind of read those immersive atmospheric books, and I have the Storyteller by Jodi. I read this a long time ago and I feel like I haven't talked about it in a while, but basically it follows this man who is beloved within his community. He's elderly, he's an ump for the baseball teams that play. He's well loved within his community, but he confesses to this woman who's a baker that he is actually a Nazi war criminal, and he kind of recounts his past, and it kind of goes off from there. So we kind of get for the past storyline during World War II, we get the perspective of a woman who's growing up Jewish in Nazi occupied like territory, and then her experience being sent to the concentration camps, and this woman crosses path with the Nazi who we kind of meet in the beginning of the story during present day. It takes off from there. I think in terms of getting like a really raw feeling of a concentration camp and kind of getting that setting, I feel like this book really showcases the horrors of that era and kind of that experience. I think it was really well done, kind of really not sugarcoating it, being brutally honest with this type of, you know, era in history. And I think this book does a really good job too of like kind of, can people be forgiven for their past actions, especially if it was such heinous crimes. I think it really does a good job at kind of showcasing that. I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about this one when they talk about historical fiction, but I think this book, I remember reading it a long time ago, it blew me away, and yeah, it was just heartbreaking to read, but I think it's a very important read for everyone. And lastly, I have a fantasy trilogy that I really enjoy, and just kind of the vibes that I get to with like kind of wet, like fantastical settings in terms of like kingdoms and all that. This one kind of comes to mind, and it is The Queen of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. This book, I love this book. So it kind of takes place in a future society, but they're regressed in terms of technology, and we follow Kelsey, who has just turned 18, and she is officially the Queen of the Tearling. When she was a baby, she was sent away for protection in the woods, and so she has come back to kind of claim her throne. But there's a lot of political problems within her kingdom, and also with the neighboring kingdom as well. So there's a lot of struggles in here regarding like separation of like state and like church and state, misogyny, and then also while this like kingdom doesn't necessarily want her to kind of take throne, there also is the opposing kingdom that wants to sabotage her as well, and it kind of goes off from there. There's a little bit of like magical aspects kind of interwoven here as well, but I think it's best that you kind of just experience it as is. But I feel like this one kind of just goes with that like gloomy kingdom vibe, which I kind of get for springtime. I don't know why I kind of get like associate, like there's obviously flowers and like regrowth and rebirth that are like themes of spring, but I just associate it with like wet, soggy time, especially like where I live. So that's why I'm kind of going with like the dreary side of spring. But I feel like this is just a really good like fantasy. It's something a little bit different. I know it's a polarizing series, but I feel with how it was like a bittersweet ending, but I felt like it was what the series like was leading up to. I think that was the best case scenario, and it talks about like sacrifices and all that. But yeah, I just really love Kelsey. She's very people find her very unlikable, but I think it's because she's very realistic. She's very flawed. She can be selfish and self-centered, but you kind of see a lot of character growth throughout this series overall. And yeah, I would just recommend this one. It is, like I said, it was popular and then it kind of died down, but I think this is definitely one of my favorite adult fantasy series of all time. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your spring reading recommendations are and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.